welcome to an episode of Mindset, sponsored by Mind the Product Training. This is a podcast video series where each session we take questions from our larger product community as well as gather questions that we have heard from all of our workshops around the world. And hopefully this podcast is going to provide you with new and helpful ways of thinking about some of your product challenges, a couple resources for you to chase down, and opportunities for deeper learning that can help you on your way. Today's episode, we're going to be focusing a lot on the concept of process engineering. A ton of the questions that we got from the last round of workshops were all about what to do when the friction is really not with the product, but with your team or your larger organization. And I think it's become sort of a running theme in terms of what we hear in our workshops, that product managers are really one of the few roles that are responsible for process engineering and thinking critically about how the team is working. And I'm really excited that the guest on today's podcast is a gentleman called Tristan Kromer. Tristan and I have continued to run into each other over many years at various conferences, various cities. I kind of never really know when you're going to pop up, but I've always really admired the way that you present ideas, and you're one of the actually earliest thinkers in kind of the lean experiment, lean testing sort of movement. And now you work on an innovation consultancy that you founded a couple of years back called Kromatic.
Yeah.
So why don't you just tell our audience a little bit about yourself and maybe what's got you excited right now?
Without trying to ramble on too much, I'm pretty all over the place in terms of my background. I was a musician for 10 years. I worked in IT security for 7 years. And kind of the theme throughout all those things is the creation of some form of product, one way or the other, whether that's producing an album, creating a full disk encryption security product, or nowadays, productizing a lot of little tiny things or helping others with their product innovation. And I guess to your theme, a lot of that has been more about figuring out how to get the team to work effectively to discover the right product to build rather than, what are the exact features to build. So these days I'm still a little bit all over the place. Like the most exciting things I'm doing right now is I'm doing a little bit of work with the government in terms of figuring out how to speed up innovation in very, very large bureaucracies. There's a very cool game, which I'll show you after this, and maybe we'll link to later, that I'm using to teach statistics. And I
need that game, actually.
Yeah,
I got a C+ in stat.
I like statistics, very handy. And I'm currently serving on the Ice Cream Innovation Board at Unilever, so that's very cool.
Okay, this sounds very exciting stuff.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I'm lactose intolerant,
so you are.
Stay away from me.
We do have lactose-free ice cream now.
I'm on board then. Really cool. All right, well, without much further ado, let's launch into the questions and see what we can chat about. So our first question is, how do you structure your prioritization process, grouping of items, and the actual prioritization experience with senior stakeholders? This question comes from Ben via our website. So I want to hear your thoughts first, because we teach a bunch of stuff around prioritization, but I feel like sometimes
fight about it.
Yeah, perhaps.
I mean, it's kind of a funny question. I feel like there's two parts to that. One is the grouping, which is remarkably detailed.
Is that Molly?
There's a little burrowing going on under the table.
We have a dog in the session.
So there's two parts, right? There's the grouping, and then there's the senior stakeholders. And I'm curious as to what your opinion is, but frankly, I don't think senior stakeholders should really be involved or part of a feature prioritization process. I don't think that makes sense. They're not the people with the information they're not the closest to the customers. Like, that is the job of the team. The senior stakeholders should be prioritizing perhaps this product versus this product, or the strategy overall. But in terms of whether we should implement this filter on our search function or not, I don't think senior stakeholders should be involved in that conversation at all.
Yeah.
So.
I do agree with that. So what we teach, which is in our Essentials workshop, is a series of different frameworks that I think work for different audiences. So one of the ones that we used to teach, but we flipped it to a different module, is the Kano method of prioritization, which I think works really well for senior stakeholders because it's all about sort of, basic needs for clients, expectations, into delighters, and how, over time, what was a delighter becomes a common expectation. And I think it's a really great method of prioritization for strategic conversations. But I think definitely on a lower level, when you're discussing features, you should come or potentially really think about how you're presenting those prioritization conversations to your senior stakeholders, and maybe keep it at the epic level if it's a discussion around a product roadmap or like sort of the larger feature buckets. I think maybe that's sort of the lowest level you want to get with senior stakeholders. I do think prioritization needs to be a collaborative exercise, and you want to make sure that when you are having prioritization conversations, you have diversity of perspective in terms of role, so design, technology, product, maybe a stakeholder who is at least really, accountable to the team to talk about maybe the business perspective, but you certainly don't want to do it with a wide group of stakeholders, and you want somebody who has a ton of context if you are bringing them in the room, maybe just to sense check. Again, if you're going really low level at feature work, that would probably be quite boring for the senior stakeholder.
One would almost hope.
Yeah, one would hope that it would be boring, unless I absolutely agree. I think if you have a senior stakeholder who is that involved on a granular feature level, you're kind of in a bit of a pickle.
Yeah,
there you go.
That's probably a problem.
Yeah. Do you have like a favorite framework for prioritization? Like, do you do 2x2s, or I think one of the ones that we teach is RICE, which is all about like the confidence percentage and those kinds of things?
Yeah, I mean, my approach has always been very non-dogmatic, right? So I don't have a specific tool that I use every single time. Like a 2x2 prioritization matrix with more important, less important, easier, harder is kind of my go-to.
Mine too.
Which I learned from Janice.
Me too.
Right?
Janice
from
Fraser.
Janice Fraser, yes.
Yeah. So she's now at Seneca, BC.
Seneca,
she was at Bionic for a while. Before that, she was Director of Innovation at Pivotal Labs, amazing product thinker.
Yeah, and then before that, she was at Luxor, where I worked with her.
That's right.
So that might be my go-to, but storyboarding or something your viewers are probably more familiar with, something like journey mapping, is another prioritization technique that I will use very commonly, because if you're doing more early stage innovation, which I typically am, it doesn't usually make sense to start from the right hand of the journey map. You have to start where the users start. So the first thing I need to build is the front door, and then I need to build the foyer, and then I need to build the living room, and then so on and so forth. So I'm kind of constantly building one step ahead of the users as they proceed in that journey.
Yeah.
So that works very, very well for me, but then it comes down to risk prioritization. And what I would be doing at that point, when you have a more fully fleshed out product, is you have that journey map, right? Step by step, like what is the story of the user going through? And going from step to step, you have a conversion rate or some form of metric that denotes progress that the user is making. And I can use those conversion rates to start figuring out where the biggest risk is, where's the biggest drop-off in this product, where are my challenges. And then based on that, I can say, well, where's my biggest drop-off? If everything is 80% and one step is 20%, then I know 20% is probably where I'm going to start.
Yeah.
Right? But if there's another step that's 30%, so say signing up for the free trial, 20%. Paying for the premium service, maybe 30%.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, if I fix the free trial, that seems like an easy win. That's my lowest conversion rate. But let's say I've run 20, 30, 40, 50 experiments on that, and I bumped it up to 21%. This number's not moving. It might be pretty close to the maximum. I either need to try like a big leap or very, very different approach there, or maybe it's time to move on to a different spot. One where there's more risk because there's more unknowns, right? I've never run a single experiment on my payment page. So let me give that a shot. Let me try and go there.
Yeah.
So you're constantly kind of balancing in terms of like what is the area of most unknowns, uncertainty.
Yeah.
Right, and that's probably where I have the most opportunity.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really good characterization of how you develop your confidence level.
Yeah.
Is just generally, it's kind of like, how many experiments have we run in this? What is our confidence level that we've really, taken a good crack at optimizing this part of the funnel? And we get a lot of questions about that, like, well, how do you determine your confidence level? And
statistics.
There's also, I think, something to be said for what I term product intuition. Like, as a product manager who works with something very closely every day, you do have an intrinsic sense of how closely you've looked at various parts of your funnel. And sometimes it is something of a gut check. That's why I like to say data informed instead of data driven, because there are so many different forms of data. Sometimes it's our intuition, which is a lifetime of data amassed over however long you've been alive. Sometimes it's qualitative, how many customers have you spoken to and watched their face light up, and then it's that more quantitative data aspect. And so all of that kind of comes together to create a confidence level.
And there is a term for that in statistics. It's a field of thought called Bayesian statistics.
Amazing.
Which I will not geek out about and start shouting out
That'll formulas. That'll be another podcast.
Yeah. But I mean, that is the basic theory. You don't start from nowhere.
Yeah.
You don't start and say, well, I have no idea what the conversion rate is going to be. You start saying well, I as a product manager think it's going to be somewhere from 20% to 40%. So that's my start. That's my confidence interval, so to speak. But then as you get more data, it'll actually help inform and develop your intuition of this product, of this customer segment.
Yeah.
So you'll have a better guess next time you add a feature. I think the one thing that I think is not happening in product management that I would like to see happening in product management is there is a little bit too much wishy-washiness about sometimes intuition. It's or it's either too wishy-washy or it's too specific.
I agree.
Right? We should be prepared to express the uncertainty in our projections and estimations and say somewhere between 20 and 40. When people do things that are very arbitrary, say this is going to have a 30% conversion rate, that's just BS. That's just making things up. And similarly, just saying well, I hope it'll work is not sufficient.
Yeah.
You should have, as a product manager, I think you have some business responsibility. Ideally, you should have some P&L responsibility, or at least some metrics responsibility. And you have to make some sort of prediction as to, I believe this will impact this business metric and we're going to make more money. It makes more sense to build this feature, or maybe not make more money, but save more lives, prevent more car crashes, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But there should be a prediction and you should be held accountable to that.
I completely agree. And I think that in terms of the prioritization discussions that you eventually go and have with your senior stakeholders, that has to be the thing that you use to back up the reason why you're prioritizing the way you have, is that you come with that confidence level that is backed up with rigor, whether that be because you talked to 10 customers and 9 out of 10 of them said the same thing, or you have this wonderful statistics game that teaches you. What is the name of the game, by the way? I'd love to know.
The project name is called Kromatic, which is not a wonderful name, but it's as good as we have right now. But we have to figure out what the name should be. It's actually not even branded on the game.
When's it going to come out? Do you know?
We've got it in beta right now, so we've got a few hundred people going through it, and it's statistics in terms of innovation and how to invest in innovation games.
Amazing.
So we'll put the URL on the thing. So hopefully it will be ready by the time this comes out.
We'll put it in the liner notes.
Yes,
that would be
go.
Amazing. Yeah, awesome. Cool. I think we took a good crack at that question. Should we try the second one?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Awesome. So this question comes from Craig through our type form. Do you have any tips or advice for gaining feedback from our customers? So Craig is a software developer, but regularly finds himself floating into the product world to encourage best practices from lean startup and design thinking, agile, etc. One area he has really struggled with is gaining feedback from customers, hence the question, it sounds like. The team have tried calling them, using email campaigns, surveys built into our website, but to little avail, and currently customer feedback is not incentivized, aka his company is not paying them. So yeah, definitely a really tricky one that I think most product people struggle with at various points. It's interesting that he's a software engineer who kind of has to step in and push it forward, which I imagine would be a very difficult place in which to sort of advocate from. What do you think?
Well, Well, first of all, I think that's great that the
That is
software
that-
engineer is the one saying, please, let's go talk to customers
Very
and get
rare.
feedback. So I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Kudos to Craig.
Kudos to Craig. Cheers, Craig.
Yeah, cheers, Craig. It does kind of make me a little bit nervous, the question, but obviously, like we don't even know what the product is, so I can't imagine the circumstance here. But if somebody is saying that our customers are not engaged enough to give us feedback, I think that is a form of feedback. I mean, they're basically saying, I don't care enough about this product to give any feedback. It could be just because maybe it's an early stage product and they only have 20 people or 100 people and they're just not really the excited early adopters, so maybe they haven't found the right audience. If it's a very robust product, maybe it's just, not exciting. Maybe it's like accounting software and the accountants are like, I just want to do my job and go home. I don't know what it is.
It could be.
Some
Maybe they're
accountants
forced
are
to
very
use
excitable.
it. Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
they're forced to use it. Maybe
Yeah.
it's like a single sign-on product that is invisible to the user. But maybe my best suggestion is just make sure that you're doing multiple follow-ups, because I always find that when I sound like for the game that I'm working on right now, right, we send out feedback requests via Intercom. I think Intercom's a pretty good system for that because you can chain it in a drip campaign, right? So the first email we sent out, there's 0 response. Right, actually, that's not quite true. It was like 12% response. But the second email, again, bumps up another 15%. So sometimes you just need the 2-day follow-up and then the 7-day follow-up. And the difference between those emails is very minimal. The first email is just, hey, will you please give us feedback, essentially. And the second email is like, hey, sorry to be persistent, but we're really determined to get feedback. Can you please answer this one question? Yeah. So we're following up. We're trying to be insistent and make sure that it's clear that we really want the feedback. And maybe the last thing I would suggest to Craig is to make sure that there is a value proposition in giving feedback.
I agree completely and utterly. I was just going to say that you have to help people understand the way in which their feedback is going to make an impact on the product for them.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then sometimes you can actually tap into an altruistic bone that most people have, which is that you're going to help us improve the product for everyone. But really, we need to hear from you so that we can make this product better for you.
Yeah.
I think it's super important to preface that whenever I'm sitting down to do customer interviews face to face, that's always the first thing I say, is that actually your negative feedback, the things that you really don't like about this product, are the most important things we need to hear, and really set it up that actually we want you to kind of be completely honest and say everything that doesn't work for you, because a lot of people don't like to they don't like to disappoint you, and they don't like to be mean. We're trained as a society not to be that way, so you do need to smooth the pathway. Of course, this is a little bit
Depends slightly on where you live. But.
Yeah, exactly. This is a little bit pre that, but you do need to set up the value proposition for why people should contribute, especially for sort of impersonal surveys where you don't have that interpersonal rapport.
Yeah, and then obviously, depending on who your customer segment is, that that value proposition that you have to offer in exchange for the feedback is going to change.
Yeah.
If you're working at change.org, you're going to have a very different call to action to give feedback, rather than, again, something that's maybe for freelancers.
Yeah.
Freelance. If I'm working as a freelancer, put yourself in that mind. I'm getting paid by the hour. I'm using this website to get services. Why do I want to give you an hour of my time to sit in a usability lab? You might have to pay that person.
Yeah.
But if you're in an early stage product and you've really nailed that early adopter segment, those people should be begging to give you feedback.
I think that's definitely the context we don't have with this question is who is your target customer? Because if you are not sending your feedback request to the right audience, it's going to be that much more difficult to get quality feedback back. One of the things that I've done in the past for really niche products that it is difficult to get access to this particular segment is I go to market research firms and help them and have them help recruit individuals that fit the particular profile. And yes, there is budgeting required for that, so I understand that that's an added layer of permissions that you have to get from your organization, but it's sometimes worth that extra sort of push if you are having trouble accessing individuals to give you feedback.
Yeah, there are products and services like Alpha UX.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know.
I know Alpha. I've used a couple in London that
Yeah.
have been really, really helpful in the past, although their names escape me at the minute. But it's just, you can go and tell them exactly the profile that
Yep.
you want to get. They will handle all of the admin, the incentivization. They'll either bring people to you or set up the phone conversations. I think if you're looking for wider feedback and you're trying to maybe go from your own customer base, I think starting with any customer help tickets is a really helpful place. Like if people have already taken the time to complain to you, they
should talk to you.
They should talk to you.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's lots of kind of different places where you can engage with customers who have actually already tried engaging with you. But I do think it's really concerning that you've tried a bunch of different types of research and still not necessarily gotten that engagement.
Yeah.
That to me, that's definitely smoke. There's a little bit of smoke there.
Yeah, my product sense says this is an early stage product which has not found the right market.
Yeah.
But I think your tips on if this is a larger product, then it's going to be a very different situation.
Yeah.
There was one tip that Dan Martell gave me, which might not help Craig, but might help somebody else that I really liked. He used to give Net Promoter Score or the product market fit survey that Sean Ellis does. That one is the people who would be very disappointed if they couldn't use your product, somewhat disappointed, or not disappointed at all.
Yeah.
But you could do the same thing with the Net Promoter Score, the promoters, detractors, and the neutrals. And he said, take your promoters and kind of ignore them, right? Because they're actually really happy with your product, so you don't need their feedback. And take the detractors, the people who kind of hate your product, and throw those away too, because they're never going to be happy.
Right.
And just really, really focus on those people who are right in the middle. Like, what are the few things you could do for them to tip them over the scale? So he would run those surveys with whatever Qualaroo or whatever the tool he was using. I think he founded that. Or no, sorry, that was Sean Ellis.
Whoever it was.
Whoever it was, right? You have that. If you have a lot of people coming to your site, you can use that Net Promoter Score, and you just zone in on those people and send them follow-ups in terms of what are they looking for, how do you get those people in. So really just target the right people if you have a lot.
Yeah, I think this all points to one of the first places you absolutely need to have a great handle at if you're starting customer feedback or any round of research is you've done your persona exercises, you have strong customer segments that are prioritized, and you understand why you're targeting who you're targeting. If you're not doing that and you're just kind of scattershotting, random individuals who don't match a profile, you might as well not do the research at all because it's just going to be a massive waste of your time, which is, I think, maybe why Craig is struggling with getting feedback is I don't think he's done appropriate persona or customer segmentation work to start from in terms of targeting and focusing his research.
Or let's say that Craig's designers and product manager perhaps have not targeted the segment.
Yeah, that's true, exactly.
Let's not bully Craig too much.
Sorry, Craig. Cool, all right, I think that's been a good run at that question. Let's move on to the next. All right, so from one of our recent London Foundation workshop attendees, how do you handle competing priorities when different departments or teams are not aligned? Ooh, I'm going to let you start with this one.
Get them in a room. This is again, there's probably not enough context to give a very coherent answer here.
There never is. I always say that to when I'm teaching. I'm always like, well, given that I know very little, it's my best guess.
If you're talking about, for example, two product teams that are targeting two different customers, and they're trying to, they're fighting over resources like I need more engineers and you need more engineers, or there's a shared service that is kind of being split between multiple teams like this. That's maybe that might just be a structural problem with the company. I have a feeling that these are not kind of Amazonian two pizza teams that are kind of focused and API driven. That there's something about the way that the organization is split up shared services that is not working.
Yeah. Let's describe the context around that Amazon two pizza team concept. Can you explain that a little bit for our watchers and listeners?
What's the best way to explain this? So this is a question of dependencies, right? So we want in your software code, you would want to have all your different components to be somewhat modular. So if you make a change here, it's not going to fundamentally force you to refactor the entire code base, right, from a software engineer perspective. And you want kind of a similar thing organizationally.
Yeah.
Right? If I make a change, what's a good example I'm trying to think of? Like if there's one team that's responsible for the payment page,
Yeah.
right? And you have another team that's responsible for the landing page, and another team that's responsible for the free trial. That is weird, right? Because the landing page impacts the expectations going into the free trial, which is going to impact, of course, the payment page. None of those teams are responsible for their own destiny.
Right.
So the 2 pizza rule is at Amazon in theory that you shouldn't have a team that's larger than you can feed with 2 pizzas, which seems weird to me because I can eat a pizza. So that's like 2 people for me.
I actually can totally eat a whole
Right,
pizza
so
too
we're
myself.
a 2 pizza team
Yeah,
for us. But depending on the size of the
I
appetizer.
don't feel great
company,
after eating that pizza, but I will eat it.
So like I feel like the teams are not structured in a way that allows them to really impact the user experience. It's an organization that has perhaps been structured in this hypothetical example along features rather than user experience, and you just wind up with what I would call the Hudson Hawk problem. I don't know if you know that movie.
No.
It's really old and was not well received in the theaters.
Okay.
It was Bruce Willis.
Okay.
It was the movie he did right after Die Hard.
Oh, bummer.
Right. Okay, so here's the thing. I thought that movie was fantastic, okay? But I had never heard of it, and I saw it at 2 o'clock in the morning on like Cinemax, and it was like perfect timing. It was ridiculous and absurd, and just a total slapstick comedy. Okay? I really enjoyed it. Congratulations, Bruce Willis.
Good job.
But, yeah, good job. But it came right after Die Hard, right? So whoever was responsible for putting together the trailer for that made it look like an action film.
Oh dear.
Okay, they made it look like Bruce Willis's next action film because that would sell more tickets in theory, right? But if you went into and saw the movie, which is the slapstick comedy, expecting it to be Die Hard, you were going to be sorely disappointed, right? So the user experience is the use or the anticipated use of a product, service, or system, right? So you've set up an expectation with that trailer that is completely negating the experience later, which might have been good if you'd known it was a comedy going in. And it's the same thing with products. So you need to architect your organization around the user experience, I think, rather than a specific feature set.
Yeah. So one of the things that this brings forward for me is in terms of the question from where friction might arise is it sounds like this organization is potentially not as outcome oriented as it needs to be, and potentially focused more on discrete outputs without understanding how each one of those outputs is going to affect the outcome of the customer. And so I find that when you have friction in prioritization or teams that are fighting over resources or whatever, it usually is because they're not having conversations about outcomes, about the overall goals that they want to achieve. Because when an organization and the disparate teams within it are focused on where everybody needs to go, the conversations around trade-offs become a lot less personal. It's not about resources or scrapping, kind of like having these, boxing sessions around like, well, who gets what, or
who gets the budget to hire
who gets the budget, or who gets priority,
maker.
Or who sort of gets the shiny thing. It's like we're all trying to get to this particular outcome that we can measure towards, and that's very clear. And so the conversation isn't personal. It's about the good of the product, the good of the customer, the good of the organization overall. So I would probably recommend to this London Foundation's workshop attendee that potentially you need to really start framing conversations more around outcomes than outputs.
Yeah, and maybe the one other thing we can add to, again, this person we have very little context on, is that the original word priority only had, it didn't have a plural, right? There was a priority. And we can top onto that, my favorite Gandhi quote, actions express priorities. So I'm sure you've experienced this, but I worked once with a company where the priority was very clear, right? It's not the best strategy in the world, it was growth. That's our priority. Growth, that's our strategy, is to grow.
Amazing.
Right? But the way they were structured, again, was they had a growth team. and had 100 people in the company. And the growth team was a team of one person with no engineers.
Cool.
Right? So that tells you what the priority of the company actually was. It was in refactoring, which I'm not saying is right or wrong, but there's a misalignment there in terms of leadership and where you're allocating resources and not being clear.
Yeah, you're, I think, a great one, and I feel like every single time I've had interactions with you, you're always talking about how if you're seeing something happening, you're and you don't like it, you're incentivizing the wrong behavior, ultimately. And Citad Lombardo also talks about this a lot. Like, whenever you watch, human beings sort of take a path where you sort of go, what? You have to look at what they're being incentivized to do. And at this organization, or in any organization where you're watching friction between departments or between teams, there is a subtle incentivization to fight because you're not expressing, the right pathway forward to them. You are incentivizing them in some way, shape, or form to have friction because of the way you're structuring the organization. And I think whenever you have friction in an organization, you have to examine what leadership is incentivizing people to do. It's like all of these Wall Street, sort of scandals in the past 10 years. It's because the individuals who are working for those organizations and banks were incentivized only by profit, as opposed to the greater good. So,
and if you think about, apply those product chops to your organization or to the system. The simplest one for me is like Twitter, right? I don't remember who I had this conversation with. It was years ago. I was like, Twitter really seems to be incentivizing people to talk about themselves. Like, it is a tool that really drives you to post pictures of your breakfast and things like that. And so if the thing that drives your main metric, like engagement, is essentially narcissism, you should expect the organization to reorganize around encouraging that, right, and driving that. And what is it today? It is the clearest expression of narcissism on the planet.
Ever.
Right, ever. So hopefully somebody's fixing that, but
I think they continue to facilitate it, but
yeah.
we won't get into that.
We won't get into that.
We'll tee on that question and move to the next one. Cool. Let's not talk about politics.
No. But the system.
So this question comes from an attendee in our Manchester Foundations workshop, which happened this past week. This workshop attendee has 20 products that they are responsible for. Some they do bug fixes for, others are very new products, so are all at varying stages of life cycle, and they don't know how to decide what work to get their team to work on. Would like some suggestions for any frameworks or tools for helping managing multiple products. Woof. What a situation. I love your facial expression right now, Tristan.
I mean, I kind of feel like this is almost similar to the last question.
It's very similar. I mean, it's definitely competing priorities, obviously, incentivizing kind of the wrong outcomes. I think there's a lot of those themes that thread through. It definitely points to there being some very strange structural situations at the organization.
Yeah, why do you have 20 products to begin with?
Yeah, I remember a lot of products. One of the first workshops that we taught in London on foundations, we got a very similar question where somebody told me that they had a Kanban board. He showed me a picture of it with 20 products kind of lined up, and he was in charge of all of them. And I just was kind of like, we're going to have to take this conversation offline because I think my brain is leaking out of my ear a little bit. So maybe where we can kind of start with these questions, because it's so difficult to grapple with without understanding the situation of the organization, what's being built, the resources that are allocated maybe per product, etc. It's really hard to move forward without a little bit more context. But just overall, when you have product managers kind of overwhelmed by this amount of detail, you do have to kind of step back and say, okay, well, what's going on with that organization in terms of how they view the role and how they view, product work in general? What are they? I mean, my first thinking is this is probably not an organization that's particularly user-driven.
No, it sounds like this poor individual is been given the role of a product manager or the title of a product manager, but is actually being asked to be a project manager,
Yeah.
which is a perfectly fine role.
Yeah.
But basically, I have resources and I need to allocate them among 20 different projects rather than I really have I have a metric, I have a user experience that I want to drive forward, and I'm empowered to allocate resources towards that goal.
Yeah.
Right now, I just have 20 stakeholders or 20 salespeople trying to sell 20 different products, and they're yelling at me because they have different priorities.
Yeah.
So there's no framework there.
Yeah.
So I think that's what they're asking for.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. It's I mean, as a product manager, you cannot hold 20 user experiences in your mind, and you certainly can't drive forward any sort of like data informed or kind of metrics informed process. Like there's just no way you can track for 20 products like that amount of information and react to it and feed it back into the system. So what Tristan and I really are proponents of and work in is these learning driven processes where you are constantly gathering information about what's happening in your product and experience and feeding it back in, and that's an ongoing process. And I've only ever done it for one product at a time, and that's been plenty. Generally.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly get into situations because I just am quick to respond to an impulse of like, oh, this would be a cool thing to build, because I like to practice building things even when it's not a full product. So I've got my little innovation game, I've got my day job, and so on and so forth.
Do you sleep?
No, not when I'm traveling to London. No. I actually do sleep pretty well. I'm good about resting and then working intensely. But I think the fundamental question we have to ask here is whether or not these 20 products somehow tie together into a coherent user experience, which might be the case, or not. Because I could see a situation where maybe you have a user experience which is or a product that is the app. Let's take WeWork, even though it's not my favorite company in the world.
Not right
now.
now.
I like their tea. But you have your app, right? That's a product. You have the building, that's a product. You've got the offices, which is a little bit different of a product than the hot desk. You probably have a different person who's responsible for facilities, meaning the tea, right? Making sure that everything's set there and the rooms are cleaned. You've got so many different pieces which all add up to a coherent user experience. And any one of those things could be really interacting with and impacting one another. So the head of ops at WeWork, or even at an individual WeWork building, I'm sure has 20 different things that they have to tie together very efficiently. And it is a question of project management. So the only framework I could maybe recommend for this person is, if these aren't 20 different products that represent 20 different business lines, is to maybe start tying them together with something like a storyboard and say, well, how did these flow together in some way? And then you can really start looking at, again, what are the steps of that sequence? What are the conversion rates? Where should I be focusing my effort? And deciding what to focus on, rather than letting everybody tell you that I need this bug fixed and this bug fixed.
Yeah.
Because now I'm prioritizing based on the user rather than the volume of complaints.
Yeah. I mean, another angle potentially for this question is, I don't know this person's level. Are they a VP of product that is handling a portfolio?
Doesn't sound like it.
Doesn't sound like it, no.
Doesn't sound like it.
But I mean, speaking to individuals who maybe are in this position, who are struggling with, handling a portfolio of products, I think generally, it definitely didn't sound like this guy was in terms of the granularity of the question. But I do think that if you are in that position where you're watching kind of this massive portfolio of products, that you have, fingers crossed, empowered individuals to drive forward in a data-informed way, and you have an individual product manager who is holding that experience and feeding up to you, then you need to get crystal clear on the information that is most critical to you achieving the outcomes and goals that you've set for each one of those individual teams. And that's really the only level that you're paying attention to. You don't go more granular than that, because you can't handle getting that detailed with 20, and you have to just, so I'm in this position right now with Mind the Product training is, we have 100 trainers around the world. We run public workshops, we have a corporate sales pipeline. There's decks, the experience of the actual workshop, this type of thing, how are all of our content,
training.
How all of our content from the website feeds into the making the experience, like da-da-da-da. What I have really had to focus on for the last 9 months is letting go of tons of detail and trusting that the individuals I've put into place to handle those streams are feeding me the information I need to know in order to make strategic decisions.
Yeah, you're almost treating it as a flip of the first question we talked about, which is perhaps the senior stakeholders are getting too much in the weeds in that case.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's all about finding the right level with process engineering and making sure that that the right individual is at the right level and that certain folks aren't coming down too much in the weeds, and that you're empowered to feed information back up in a way that is trusted and, empowered.
And at one level, right, if you wind up with 20 products and they're all kind of equal priority, so to speak, maybe we can take a cue from Steve Jobs reorganizing Apple and say, we've got 100 products. Let's chop out 96 of them.
Perfect.
Like, what are the 4 that are really important?
Yeah, totally. All right, next question. All right, so the next question comes from Jason through our type form. What are some examples of teams who have effectively scaled their product organizations with multiple levels of product managers? So multiple levels of product managers is kind of an interesting thing because
you're assuming that that's a good thing, multiple levels of product managers.
Exactly. I mean, and generally, like, as if you have an organization that is, product driven or user driven, the general structure is that you have product managers who are very empowered, they have a lot of access, and then you have potentially like portfolio or program managers who are helping set the, sort of objectives or outcomes for those teams, and then maybe that program manager feeds up to either senior VP of product or the CPO, depending on how many layers there are. So generally, when you have product managers working in a really great structure, they're empowered enough to not really need a ton of hierarchy above them generally. And I think most product organizations that are kind of sort of viewed as industry best practice are, I think, relatively flat in that way because they have product managers who are empowered to do what they believe is right for the product, and there's not a ton of oversight or nitpicky. I mean, that's probably the wrong way to characterize it, but like, sort of like this concept of like multiple levels of product managers, that's kind of where you get into the product owner, product manager debate generally, because I find that those two roles generally emerge when there's a lot of hierarchy involved.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think I agree with your. I think I agree in the general sense, but like I would maybe reframe it.
Yeah,
right?
cool.
Like, I think it's not necessarily that a certain number of levels of the organization is good or bad. Like sometimes you need a giant pyramidal structure because that's the way it works. I think it's a question of, is the decision making at the right level, right? The problem with hierarchy is not that you have a lot of levels. Okay, the problem is that for a person to make a decision on the bottom, they need to report up, and then
Thank you, Tristan.
so there's this delay in decision making, right? And the people who are making decisions are not the people with the most information, right? So Amazon is a company that obviously is sort of famous for this. I've never worked with Amazon, so I can't speak directly to it, but that two-pizza team concept, again, is a team where they have the most information, so they are responsible for making the decisions. And you made the same point in terms of like, well, make sure you have input from the designers and the developers and the product managers, because all those people have a certain piece of information, and that information and those different perspectives, that diversity of opinion, have to come together to create an informed decision. But the issue is when you have people's opinions that are in there that are actually not relevant. They don't have the data.
Yeah.
And it's just somebody coming in from a senior level who has 20, 30 years of experience. I have 20, 30 years of experience. I'll tell you how to disrupt this industry.
Why do you need to talk to the customers? I can tell you everything you need to know, which is exactly what someone told me once.
Right, yeah, which is, I mean, there are those people, but most often than not, the person with 20 years experience is not going to be the person that is going to disrupt the industry. That is the industry. So we just need to make sure the decisions are being made at the right level by the people with the right information. and if we have time for a 30-second story, I was once asked as the manager of our Vietnam office, like I was called in to, I don't know, to judge or adjudicate somehow the decision of what water to buy for the water cooler, because our office managers were in some sort of clear conflict over the situation.
Amazing.
Yeah, right. And that to me was right when I took over, and I was not even meant to be taking over, but I kind of found myself in the situation. I was like, what is going on here? Like, why would I have any opinion on this whatsoever? I don't even know what the brands are in Vietnam. I just got here. So it's like, why should I be making this decision at all? And ultimately I just said, like, look, I don't know what you're talking about. You have to resolve this. This is your job, right? So fortunately it seemed to work out and nobody got poisoned or anything. So, but as people in this hierarchy, we have to resist the idea that our job is to make decisions, and that if we're not making decisions, somehow we're not doing our job. A lot of the times you should be deferring this decision to the people who actually have the information on the ground.
Exactly. I mean, that harkens back to this program or portfolio management thing. Like,
Yes.
if you are handling 20 products and having to make granular decisions for every single product, you are effed.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to empower individuals who, as you say, have more information. And I think this really calls to mind, like, there's a sense, and I see this a lot with some of our corporate clients, definitely with people who come to our public workshops, that there's some unicorn company out there that somehow managed to find this like process panacea that's doing it perfectly. And the thing is that no company, even those marquee names, those beautiful Silicon Valley unicorns out there.
Intuit and Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I can guarantee you they have a very messy process internally, and there's, like, I'm sure, lots and lots of points of friction. What they are attempting to incentivize, though, again, talking about incentivizations and action, are people to take responsibility and be accountable for the decisions that they make.
Yeah.
And they are empowering individuals at all levels to do so. And organizations that really struggle with changing process or doing these agile transformations are ones who are not willing to let go of the command and control culture that requires senior people to say yes or no to everything, and disempower individuals who have, as you say, the most information, because they're so worried about sticking their neck out there.
Yeah, and I think that there's a broken feedback loop
Yes.
that you kind of you implied very strongly there, right? Because the feedback loop in a company that is struggling with that transformation is that my mechanism of feedback as the product manager is whether or not the boss agrees with my recommendation.
Precisely.
Right? As opposed to, we have metrics in place, we have data in place that is telling us whether the decision was right or wrong. And if I, as a product manager, can get feedback on whether or not my decision has the desired impact, I'm getting better at making decisions. But if the only feedback is my boss agrees with me or not, then you don't have an agile organization.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not how it works.
Precisely. Yeah, I think this is a question of whether or not every conversation or decision is an opinion fight. If you're not actually truly data informed, and that's not taken seriously, and you're not expected to come up with a case and a group of evidence to back up the reason why you've made a choice, then it really does come down to an opinion fight between you and whoever is potentially paid more than you.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you will lose
Yeah.
most times in those arguments, and that is absolutely not the way to create an entire organization that has, as you say, agile teams. An organization with lots and lots of agile teams has to be an organization that is listening to the data and evidence that is driving decisions. And if it's not doing that, then you're never going to be able to scale that process, because it's just too many decisions for people at a certain level to be informed about. And it's just a question of whether or not, and I see this all the time from individuals who are asking these types of questions, like, it's very clear they're very scared to be honest. It's very clear they're very scared. No feedback loop, but also just like this horrific sort of like unsafe environment where if you happen to say something that goes against, whatever highest paid opinion is in the room, you will get your head chopped off.
Yeah, there's that story, I can't remember now the company, but it was a telecommunications company where they had very spotty reception over the US. And when the executives from Europe came over to the US, they always had perfect reception, right? Because the agenda for when they came was broadcast, so the engineers would make sure that those towers were like fully throttled to optimize that experience. So like the feedback loop was deliberately broken because there was that culture of jumping down people's throats, and like nobody wanted to get in trouble, so you never give the information or the feedback to even how leadership is leading.
Yeah.
And if leadership can't be courageous enough to hear the honest truth and not kill the messenger, like your incentive system in the company is broken.
Yeah, so often with sort of like these scaling conversations, like people think it's about, structure of the organizations, but actually it's really just about culture.
Well, cultural and feedback. Like it is a structure, but it's the structure of the system rather than the structure of the org chart.
Yeah, I agree.
So the most agile organization for me is not one that like has they found the perfect number of levels. It's the one that maybe is actually not doing that well right now, but they've created a really wonderful feedback loop. So I have like a strong feeling that this company is going to do well in the future, because like Intuit I've always had a lot of respect for, because they iterate on their own internal processes and even innovation program. Yeah. So that kind of makes me feel pretty good for their future.
Yeah. The continuous improvement culture, I think is amazing.
Yes.
Grand. Cool. I think we took a good crack at that one. I don't know if we solved it. Cool. So thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Mindset. Thank you so much for Tristan for making the
Thanks
time.
For having me.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I'm
nice
so
to
glad
see you in London
Yeah,
today.
I'm so glad we caught you while you were in town. I'd like to thank James Davenport, who is our wonderful videographer, Ross, who is our AV guy, Laura, who handles all of our setup and goes through all the questions for us. And we really hope to hear from you in the future. So if you have a question that is, sort of top of mind, check out our mindset type form, which you can find on our internet training pages on our website, www.mindtheproduct.com. Or if you come to one of our workshops in various cities across the planet, your question that you ask in class could also feed its way into here as well. And you can find all of our dates for public workshops on www.mindtheproduct.com/training. And Molly says, thanks for joining. If you heard her scratching, she was just really excited about all the questions.